Alrighty, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's begin. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to just start by welcoming everybody to today's live event, Navigating Reimbursement Options for Your Fleet, Acing the Inclusion of Personal Vehicles. Thank you so much for joining us. So together we'll explore how opening a vehicle reimbursement program, or VRP, for the use of personal vehicles can reduce fleet costs, streamline operations, and increase flexibility for your team, all while keeping your employees happy. So today we're really going to be asking the questions, does everybody in your fleet really need a company-provided vehicle? Are your fleet practices effectively adapting to your needs as you grow and as the economy changes? Would a more flexible, cost-efficient, and streamlined vehicle program benefit you and your employees? We're really excited to share some actionable insights on when to know it's time to explore a reimbursement option. We're going to share the common tax-free models of 2024 and how to make the transition from a company vehicle to a personal one as smooth as possible. Plus, we'll walk through some hybrid approaches for organizations who are looking to maintain a mix of both options. To introduce myself, my name is Lee Adam. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at CarData. So for 2 years now, I've been working really closely with customers and prospective customers alike to design reimbursement solutions that meet their unique needs while consulting on industry standards and best practices, of course. So today, I'm joined by Griffin Demerick Henshaw, our Senior Business Development Representative here at CarData. Griffin will be helping us unpack how reimbursement programs can effectively manage your fleet's operational costs, reduce liability, and simplify time management. So Griffin, over to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks very much, Lee, and welcome to everyone today. I'll kick us off by giving an overview of what we do and what information on fleet optimization you should get out of today's live event. So here at CarData, we're a fully managed vehicle reimbursement partner that works with companies to design, scale, and optimize their vehicle programs. So essentially, we pair our 25 years of expertise with data and simple software to build the best fitting end-to-end reimbursement solutions for your company, paying your drivers on the road fairly and tax-free. So I work in business development at CarData. I'm typically the first point of contact, often speaking with folks in fleet management, human resources, finance, and procurement. So here's an overview of what we want to learn today, focusing on understanding how and when you want to integrate a vehicle reimbursement program in with your fleet. So number one, we want to reduce cost creep, such as rising insurance costs, as well as manage liability and avoid off-the-clock risks. We also want to reduce management time by managing processes more efficiently and effectively, and increase flexibility and fairness of programs, keeping employees happy. So in order to achieve these objectives, we're going to be talking about a variety of topics today, looking specifically at how fleet programs can be optimized. So looking at time, cost, and flexibility. We're also going to look at the rise of reimbursement models in 2024. So what they are and why they're popular. We're going to look at starting a compliant reimbursement program, as well as best practices for transition management. Finally, leveraging tools and partnerships for success. And as a bonus, you'll get access to our rate building tools to see how we build out reimbursement rates for your drivers. So what do we need to consider as part of fleet and mobility strategy? There's a number of factors that need to be taken into account. This includes our vehicles on the road. So cars, trucks, specialized vehicles, driver safety, compliance and liability management. This is something fleet managers specifically work with a lot. Additionally, cost control. So with the rising costs of fuel, insurance, and maintenance, how are we going to manage that effectively? We also look at operational flexibility, so the ability to adapt to growth and business changes. With a lot of companies we work with, this often sits within merger and acquisitions. If you're onboarding a large volume of employees, is your fleet able to adapt to that? We also look at the tech and data, so software-driven fleet tracking and performance optimization. And then finally, mobility as a service. So mobility as a service encompasses options like public transport, ride sharing, and rentals. And it's important to note that this is expected to grow by 23% by the year 2030. So especially with the push for sustainability, alternative transport methods are really on the rise. And then of course, overall employee satisfaction. Especially with the push for employee retention in a very dynamic work environment, we want to ensure that your employees are satisfied with what they're getting. So we would traditionally think of a fleet as a group of vehicles, whether they're leased or owned by a company. But as we enter 2025, in practice, fleets won't just be groups of cars or trucks. They'll encompass a full mobility management strategy regarding how companies enable their people to move for work. Of course, these strategies will parallel other market trends we've seen, such as flexibility, adjusting to changing employee preferences, and working to reduce company risks and costs so that you have a scalable and agile solution that's ready for your company's next business venture.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Griffin. Now let's compare traditional fleets to vehicle reimbursement programs or VRPs. So let's start with a scenario in which a company purchases or leases a group of vehicles, cars, trucks, etc. Most of you here do that today. So this could be an open or a closed-end lease. A company could have a relationship with a dealership. Regardless, this setup often comes with high initial fixed costs like acquisition and procurement, which we know can be tens of thousands of dollars and come with lengthy contracts, for example, in leases. But also has high operating costs, right? Fuel, maintenance, reconditioning, accidents, repairs, insurance. It requires a lot of management. And if you're joining us today as a fleet manager, you may be responsible for overseeing not just the vehicles themselves, but most likely the entire operation, right? So liability management, safety, asset tracking, and today, even sustainability. If you're joining us and you're not a fleet manager, some things have probably fallen on your lap in the past that are not a part of your job description, such as dealing with the high costs of fleet management. There are pros, of course, to having a traditional fleet, like brand image control when drivers are on the road, and managing safety head-on with things like dash cams, speed monitors, and other surveillance systems. All, of course, privacy questionable for the modern driver. But of course, there is a level of control that exists with a traditional fleet, but it's not necessarily control over your costs. Now, when a reimbursement method is included, employees are unable to bring their personal vehicle to work, and businesses only pay for work-related use. This means business trips, business mileage only. This means no paying for personal use or no off-hour liability concerns. Instead, employees are simply reimbursed for expenses related to doing their job. And this is done completely tax-free. It's really best suited for employees who are using non-specialty vehicles like SUVs, sedans, or pickup trucks. These are often sales or service representatives that are of best fit. Now, before we dive into reimbursement alternatives that leverage employee personal vehicles, I want to take a moment to note, of course, that there's going to be times where employee-provided vehicles or typical fleet management makes the most sense and it's the best fitting solution. The first case to note is when driving employees have jobs that require specialty vehicles in order to execute, right? So for example, delivery drivers and commercial trucks or tankers, you can never replace those. That is a requirement for business. Another example of when company-provided vehicles best fit the bill is when your select employees are required to use branded vehicles, right? So whether these vehicles are pooled or provided to each employee for business and sometimes personal use, these vehicles include a marketing investment that can sometimes be challenging to adjust. I always think about those Red Bull cars with the big cans on top. Those are very exciting, right? Great marketing. And for some companies, that's going to be of high importance, regardless of the risks associated with a branded vehicle getting into an accident, which, believe me, we've seen. But of course, wanting to maintain a strong, visible unification of your fleet is a good reason to consider keeping employees in company-provided vehicles. But the last most important note to consider is that fleet vehicles really make the most sense when you truly understand and can easily decipher the real use thresholds that indicate that a person may, one, need a vehicle under one of the options I noted before, but two, financially qualify for a company vehicle when compared to other fair market field enablement alternatives. Both programs, VRP or fleet, can be really attractive benefits for employees if designed and managed well. But why is reimbursement growing so much?
So, what's leading the charge behind companies integrating personal vehicle programs with their fleet strategy? There's a number of factors we have to look at here. Number one is that vehicle reimbursement programs allow you to manage rising costs. There are no surprises or unanticipated large scale investments, like when you have a number of fleet vehicles that are no longer able to operate. Vehicle reimbursement also removes the gray area that exists when paying for operating costs and ownership fees of a fleet vehicle that are often unrelated to the driving that's actually being done for work purposes. Additionally, reimbursement programs reduce the impact of insurance costs, especially unexpected changes after an accident or adding a new driver. And this is done while keeping liability managed through insurance verification. Streamlining of processes, as well as taking some of the burden off of those in charge of your fleet, are also a big asset to vehicle reimbursement programs. And then finally, simple and easy change and transition management allows you to work with your program partner to build a strategy that keeps your employees happy and is very doable for your administrators. So here you can see vehicle price inflation over the past 5 years. We've all felt inflation in our day-to-day, and we can see that the auto industry is definitely not immune. And then this overview shows us inflation rates broken down into different aspects of owning a vehicle. So like new vehicle prices, insurance rates have increased substantially. Driving has also proven riskier in recent years, so making accidents more likely. This drives up the average price of repair costs substantially and makes the risk of off-the-clock accidents more financially detrimental for organizations. For an average person driving one vehicle, this is annoying, but when you're a company with a large fleet, this can be absolutely detrimental to your operation. So beyond the upfront costs, the unexpected and unpredictable costs of owned or leased fleets carry a very heavy burden for administrators and companies. It's hard to budget for a program that can have hundreds of thousands of dollars of uncertainty year over year. So here are some stats. The average fleet vehicle collision costs $70,000 annually. The damage costs for a fleet of 1,000 vehicles in 2021 was $1 million. You can imagine what this cost would look like in 2024 with current inflation. Additionally, 44% of companies with fleets cite rising costs as their top challenge. So company cars are the highest cost vehicle vehicle program, with personal use being around 25% of the average employee's driving. However, chargebacks are often not accounting for this at all and are in fact quite a small percentage of that. So overall, about 30 cents of every dollar is lost when fleet vehicles are leveraged in the wrong scenarios.
So true. So let's just summarize what we've talked about so far. Now, although fleet vehicles are very well suited to be leveraged in specific situations, they just don't fit the bill for all work-related driving activities, especially in today's climate. So, of course, significant risk and liability, including personal use, off-the-job behavior, are something to be considered. Rising costs to purchase and maintain vehicles, both owned and leased. Vehicle procurement and sourcing challenges, where traditional fleets can often not keep up with business expansion, M&As, hiring, turnover. And then, of course, lack of choice for people, right? People really value choice these days. They want flexibility and they want to know that their lifestyle is supported by their organization. So their family size, their work hours, their driving preferences, VRPs help with that. And then finally, of course, time-consuming operational management. As your company grows, so will your burdens, especially if you have both a specialized fleet and a non-specialized fleet. You'll face more management burden, especially if you're not optimized for who is in your company cars. So these are just a couple of reasons why fleet managers, sales leaders, HR leaders, finance teams alike are shifting away from only offering company cars and considering reimbursement options. A one-size-fits-all just doesn't fit the bill as we enter 2025 when you're looking to streamline costs and keep your people happy. All right, now I want to bring something to our attention. Reimbursement options are typically leveraged in general to replace outdated alternatives to mobility enablement. So we talked about company cars a lot, but often if you're trying to get off a company car, you might ask yourself, okay, should I go to a manual mileage submission? Should we go to a flat allowance? That seems easy, right? But the challenge with this is that there's a big lack of accountability and improper cost allocation with all of these options, right? meaning it's often unclear whether the cost of the program is justified by its use, so by what your drivers are actually doing, and whether its use is justified and properly allocated to the cost. So are you spending too much, too little, just right? Why? And who says, right? Are you using market data? Are you looking at what your competitors are doing? How do you know? So the results of this are often unnecessary corporate liability, risk of over underspending, equity and turnover risks, just due to lack of market data use and real need being accounted for in your solutions. And not to mention the immense tax waste if you don't choose a tax-free alternative. So it's because of this that companies are turning to vehicle reimbursement, which really reduces ambiguity. All right, time to get into the good stuff. So there are 3 tax-free reimbursement methods as recognized by the IRS today. Particularly, I will note in the United States, these programs are also available in Canada, though managed slightly differently from a taxability perspective, which we'll discuss a little bit. Now, every company is going to have different territory sizes. You're going to have different customer site locations, employees with varying driving frequency, unique success metrics, or company goals that you have being given by leadership or from a growth perspective for each team. So these factors really have to be taken into account. There, again, is never really a one-size-fits-all approach for any company. But the best way to increase the financial efficiencies of your program and to ace the inclusion of personal vehicles is to select and effectively manage a program or group of programs that are best suited to your employees' behaviors. And we're going to be sharing some tips on how to do that today. So starting on the left side here, we have cents per mile. This is best suited for low mileage occasional drivers and is tax-free on captured business mileage. Second, in the middle there, we have a tax-free car allowance, sometimes called an accountable car allowance, which can support a payment in being up to 100% tax-free using something called Publication 463 in the United States. More on this later. And the most common VRP approach is fixed and variable rate reimbursement, which when done correctly is 100% tax-free and leverages up-to-date market cost data. Exciting. So I will note that each program you see here has one thing in common. It requires effective business mileage reporting. And software tools exist to enable this in a really simple end-to-end full cycle way, which we'll show you a little bit about today. Now, before we get into them one by one, why are these tax-free? Besides the fact that the IRS and CRA tell us they can be under certain scenarios. Well, the key reason is that reimbursement covers cost directly related to company-required work. And unlike compensation, it's not considered income. So as long as it complies with IRS or CRA regulations and compliance standards, it's tax-free. Essentially, it's a reimbursement for necessary work-related expenses as defined by the company. So it's not seen by the government as additional pay. Think of your program as a company's formal receipt for the cost that it covers. So that said, although it's a reimbursement, a well-designed program can still offer really exciting strategic tax-free benefits for employees. Now, by using market data, it can be tailored to enhance their overall comp package and make the transition from fleet out of company cars to a reimbursement model really as smooth and attractive as possible. So let's start by looking at the most basic reimbursement type. All right, cents per mile, otherwise known as basic mileage reimbursement. Everybody in this room has probably submitted for a couple miles here and there before, so this should be pretty familiar. So this basically means pairing a driver's submitted mileage directly to a basic per mile rate. I drive, I capture mileage, I submit it, boom, very easy. It's multiplied by a per mile rate. This strategy is ideal for the occasional driver. So this could be somebody who hops in their car once in a while to visit a customer or to run a work-related errand. Why? Well, cents per mile is typically best suited for those who are driving under 5,000 miles per year in the United States. This would be considered low mileage or casual drivers for all intents and purposes under the guidance of the IRS and how their publications can be navigated. That's because most companies who use this approach also use the IRS standard rate, which is 67 cents per mile in 2024. And is typically updated annually. This means that the IRS has declared that the national average cost of driving across all of the United States, average across every state, is 67 cents per mile today, okay? Or this year. Companies can then pay up to that rate and be permitted to be 100% tax-free on the exchange. There's no tax. So this is often really simple and a perfect fit for the occasional driver, one that doesn't have major financial burden associated with their car, okay? Couple miles in, couple miles out. Now, if you pair this per mile strategy with effective reporting tools and simple mileage capture methods, reimbursements can be very effective and again, 100% tax-free. Great. It is super important to note that mileage tracking apps actually see an average of a 25% reduction in mileage versus manually submitted mileage. So when we see customers make the change, there's often a very big discrepancy between what they thought their mileage was and what it actually is, which is a very big financial benefit of accountability simply from using an automated mileage capture tool on the road. Now, I mentioned the 5,000 mile mark. Why? Well, when we creep over that 5,000 mile mark, we start to see this higher mileage area. The ROI and the fairness of these options become to be a little bit more questionable. The IRS standard rate doesn't take into account the fluctuations of living costs, such as maintenance and fuel in different regions. It doesn't take into account the impact of things like actual depreciation on your car. It's just that. It's a national average. This means that some drivers will get way more than they need as they rack up miles and they drive more and more and more. We've actually seen some people get around $40,000 per year for their cents per mile reimbursement before switching to an alternative. That's enough to buy maybe even 2 cars, but a car a lot of the time, right? And then we've seen other drivers who get way less than they need based on the cost in their area, right? So that's the challenge with this rate. It's great. It's very well calculated for the occasional driver. But for our daily road warriors, typically those who are coming off of a company car or expanding away from traditional company cars only, it can over and under deliver because it's really not designed to be used in every situation. And that's why different IRS approved options exist, which we'll be talking about today. I will note, in Canada, the CRA actually offers tiered variable rates that are 100% tax-free in Canada. Unlike some of these other alternatives, the IRS and CRA are not the same. So in Canada, there is a base 70 cents per kilometer rate for the first 5,000 miles, and then 64 cents per kilometer thereafter for most provinces. These cents per kilometer rates, when paired with mileage capture and reporting tools, are also a really great and fair alternative for Canadian drivers, especially, of course, because the tier nature does a good job about reducing the likelihood of immense overpayment for Canadian drivers. But with that being said, let's take a look at the star of the show under the IRS. So when looking to make a transition from company cars to personal vehicles, Favor by far takes the cake. Favor stands for fixed and variable rate reimbursement. If you leave today remembering one thing, remember Favor as a data-driven, tax-free reimbursement for high mileage drivers. This is a strategy for reimbursement that leverages both the regional and the vehicle-specific information that might influence a person's real driving expenses. And then it reimburses the business portion of those costs relative to the real-life conditions and their employee driving frequency. It does so using a combination of an allowance, so a fixed payment, and a per-mile method, a variable payment. Favor is often considered the most common approach for high mileage drivers, as it's widely considered the most fair. Why? Well, the data-driven nature of this method actually uses a market cost database to build employee rates relative to the real cost of driving in their specific geographical area, right in their zip code. That data-driven nature also makes it 100% tax-free if compliant to regulations. Because of this, the rates essentially prove to the IRS in a very granular data-driven way that every bit of money that you're giving your people for driving for work is going directly to company-required cost, right? So there's no hidden income. Because there's no hidden income, there's no tax, and there's no under or overpayment. It's fair. Favor is eligible to be tax-free for employees who drive over 5,000 miles per year, along with a couple other compliance regulations. Let's learn a little bit more. So Favor rates are built off the type of vehicle required to do the job as required by the company. So for you, you give your people fleet vehicles today. So when switching to personal vehicles, you could say, okay, the type of vehicle required to do the job is parallel to the type of vehicle they're using today. Could be mid-sized sedan, a certain branded SUV, or a pickup truck. It all depends on your company requirements, and of course, different requirements for different departments, whether they're a sales, service representative, etc. It's often a good idea to do a rate comparison and ask yourself, well, if we're using a Chevy Equinox today, do we really need to reimburse on a Chevy Equinox tomorrow? Is another brand a better idea? What about a different size, a blended model? That's where your partner can help you. You also look at industry standards. Now, once you determine that base vehicle, employees are reimbursed based on these standard costs of this car right in their location, broken down into 2 payments, fixed. Think of this like a monthly car allowance. So this reimburses the business use of car ownership costs, right? So you own a car, but of course you use it for business. So the fixed portion will reimburse the business use percent of that, right? So your depreciation, your insurance, your license and registration, and your taxes. Little small tidbit here. The most common business use percent to reimburse on is 71.4. Why? Well, that's 5 out of 7 days of the week. Very, very common. We can actually go up to 75% of a person's ownership costs. Now, the variable portion is applied on a per mile rate, very similar to cents per mile. It covers the operating expenses as they're incurred, and it also depends on the location of the driver. This includes things like fuel, maintenance, and tires in someone's area. And again, it typically is quite a lot lower than the cents per mile rate, which tends to average both the ownership and the operating costs all in one, whereas this really breaks it down to make it fair and also to make sure you're not overpaying anybody. So let's look at an example of how this is built in action. All right, so this is what a rate looks like. Step 1 is to input your driver's zip code and address data. So in this example, I used Vegas, favorite city. Step 2 is to select the vehicle profile in which you will calculate the reimbursement. So again, you ask yourself, what's the basic type of car someone should be driving in order to do their job? Could be same as today, could not be. And then, of course, this is the car that you use for the cost data that fuels the reimbursement. So how much that car cost to drive, to purchase, everything in between. All of this information is calculated on the back end. And then step 3 is you edit the details, right? So you choose this vehicle's age, the average business use that an employee would most likely use for their car, insurance requirements for your employees, and then you adjust your inputs according to your goals. Tax-free, fair market, non-overpayment rates will be created for each driver, keeping you happy, keeping them satisfied too. It's fair, it pays them in their area. Now, if you're looking to maintain fleet vehicles instead of making a full transition to reimbursement, once you have your base vehicle model understood, a best practice is actually to work with your VRP partner to find you a really solid cost break-even point for what mileage threshold makes sense for you to keep people on personal vehicles versus keeping them on company required or provided vehicles. So it really depends on how you design your rate. But reimbursement, as I showed before, saves companies an average of 30%. However, keeping a higher mileage threshold for company vehicles is sometimes seen. Again, it'll depend on your rate averages. I've seen companies have thresholds up to 20,000 miles, 40,000 miles. It really depends on your organization and how we built your reimbursement model. But really lean on your partner if you're looking to maintain fleet vehicles within your complete vehicle policy. Now, I want to introduce you to the last option in the United States. This is called the tax-free car allowance, otherwise known as an accountable car allowance. And it's very similar to, you might have at a past job gotten like a flat stipend per month, 600, 500 bucks per month. Most of us are familiar with that. And it's actually associated with IRS publication 463. It is an alternative method of reimbursement for US companies that allows organizations to offer simple flat allowances to drivers without the compliance regulations associated with more robust, flexible, data-driven alternatives like Favor. Now, this is able to be up to 100% tax-free relative to an employee's captured mileage. In this scenario, I could pay my drivers anything I want. I could give them 10,000 miles flat, $10,000 flat for the year, although I don't encourage that you do that. You could, in theory, pay your people $10,000 flat. You could pay them $500 a month. Heck, you can even use favor rates if you'd like. There are no regulations. The difference is that they're measured for tax against the IRS standard rate, meaning they don't start tax-free. Tax is simply removed as mileage is captured. So how does it work? Well, I take their mileage and I multiply it by that pesky IRS standard rate that I mentioned before, so 67 cents per mile, and then I compare it to what they actually got under their tax-free car allowance. Only the difference is considered taxable. If you get paid more than the IRS standard rate equivalent, the difference is taxed. If you get paid less, there's no tax at all. This directly lowers your tax burden. You're eating away at your tax bill with this method. Now, this is a great option for those looking to lock a rate across a department. So if you want everybody to get the same amount, but of course, it leaves room for some taxability that favor really doesn't. Of course, favor is the only scenario in which you can pay over the IRS standard rate equivalent without paying tax, making it the most cost efficient, the most fair, especially for those who are coming off of a fleet vehicle.
Perfect. So let's consider a fleet that includes 220 drivers and has an estimated cost of $2.2 million. The client we were working at this time, I would like to note, has a significantly lower price tag to their fleet than we would typically see for a fleet of that size. So the cost per driver on a fleet for this company sat at about $10,000 per year. The company was motivated to change their program because they were uncomfortable with the variability in costs. So their overall estimate didn't include things like the cost of insurance following accidents and some of the other variables that we see with fleets. So they decided to reimburse their drivers for a mid-size sedan personal vehicle. So the reimbursement model totaled about $7,000 per year per driver, and that included both the fixed and variable portions of their favor reimbursement. So this change allowed for a 30% reduction compared to their baseline fleet costs. And this was not accounting for the unexpected variables of fleet / the liability that would also be factored in. So it's important to note that not all companies are going to have the same motivators. Some may want to see as much savings as possible, while others are less concerned about savings and more concerned about liability. So it's really important to tailor something that's really unique to your needs and what you want your program to look like. So how does a company realize cost savings and liability reduction through a program transition or partial transition? So these can help walk us through a couple of these points as well. We're going to look at the considerations and steps to building a program, how to select the right fit, effective change management and communication to your employees, leveraging the right technology, and then finally measuring the success of your program.
Alrighty, so we learned a lot today. A lot of information coming at us. So how do we bring it together? Well, to build a flexible and well-designed / optimized program to achieve varying objectives, understanding that HR teams, finance teams, sales teams alike will all have different goals for their program, their mobility enablement program, we really want to consider all of these factors. So first is really going to be budget, right? Like what are we playing with? What is our actual constraints as an organization? The next really important factor to consider is, of course, industry and market standards. So what are your competitors doing? What are best practices? And of course, real-time cost of driving. So how are things like insurance and maintenance changing in the market? And how should that mirror our program to keep people engaged and make sure that everybody is being reimbursed very fairly? Second step, of course, is choosing a program. So working with your team to understand compliance and IRS qualification to build a program that makes sense given your driver's behaviors. We also want to look at things like transition planning. So how does it make sense to, transition slowly or quickly from your current program? And how does the training process work to make sure that your team feels really enabled? And then lastly, we want to look at things like job types, requirements, tiers for different seniorities, and any other internal vehicle policies that we want to apply. One really interesting point here is, as Griffin mentioned, every company is going to have different motivators. Sometimes companies will come to us and say, like, we have a cost savings goal. We have to hit this. We want to avoid a layoff. We want to avoid other detrimental things. We really want to keep people whole, but we need to see, a 20% savings, 30% savings. And so it's important to note how to split cost savings amongst the drivers in the company. Some people want to split it 50-50. Others want to make sure their people are whole, but while keeping, as much cost savings to reinvest in other business ventures. So that's elements that we can consider when we're looking at things like industry standards and deciding where you want to play. I also want to note that Hybrid programs that leverage different types of reimbursement are very, very, very common. Your people are not all going to have the same needs. So, for example, using a CPM program for low mileage drivers, favor for your daily road warriors, and something like a tax-free car allowance for executives who don't drive too much but want to keep that fixed portion to their reimbursement is super common. And that's what you should leverage us for. A lot of organizations choose to standardize their tooling, for example. So everybody's probably on the same reimbursement provider and mileage capture app across, Canada, US, and different departments, but really build programs for employee groups depending on their needs with their partner. So let's look at an example of that. So as mentioned, the key is really to categorize your drivers based on their annual mileage and their driving needs to match them to the right program. When you work with a fully managed partner like CarData, we make this easy not only when you develop the program, but every day thereafter. We are here with you. You never have to do this alone. So here's an example from a recent transition. This company had mileage submissions and company cars. So they were allowing mileage submissions manually for everyone who had below an estimated 25,000 miles that year. And then everybody who drove over that received a company car. But their leadership really wanted to reduce their costs and exit the car business. So for their rare drivers, those who drove under 5,000 miles per year, our CPM program was the best fit to keep payments fair, easy, tax-free, and accountable. As we mentioned, we want to reduce the likelihood of overpayment for mileage by 25%. I will note that the people who drove once in a blue moon, so these people really under 1,000 miles per year, like back office employees really rarely drive, they would still submit their mileage as they did today because the likelihood of fraudulent activity or mileage mismanagement due to their low frequency of driving was really a low financial risk. For their new hires and the people who were currently submitting for mileage but drove over 5,000 miles per year, they were going on the favor program. That was the ideal solution for this business to see cost savings and to pay fairly. And they also had that last group of drivers who had company cars who drove over 25,000 miles per year. However, they were looking again to slowly remove these vehicles. So as we reached the end of the lease period for each vehicle, they transitioned these individuals to favor programs once the car was turned over. So this plan was presented to employees. Everyone felt really confident about the process, the plan, and it made transition really seamless for the organization. I'm using a gradual phased-in approach to ensure compliance throughout the process. Now, other strategies that we've seen for employee-owned cars include things like selling back the vehicle to employees, sometimes for a discount, other times if it's fully depreciated for a very low amount, or providing a flat stipend to assist with any vehicle purchasing that's required. Some companies don't do any of that. It really depends on your unique situation. You can take a look at your particular industry as standards there are quite different, as well as your cost constraints, and develop a transition plan like this that works for your team.
Perfect. Thanks, Lee. So how do you execute on implementation of personal vehicle reimbursement? If we are to simplify it, it can be basically broken down into 3 steps. So first, you're going to design a program that suits the unique needs of your organization and your employees on the road. Then you're going to leverage straightforward technology for your drivers to track their mileage. And then finally, you're going to reimburse them tax-free. And this is something that your vehicle reimbursement partner can do directly. So it's not an administrative burden on your end. So the mobile tracking application utilized allows drivers with a variety of levels of tech literacy to capture their mileage and categorize their trips. I will note that using mileage tracking technology typically saves drivers 1 week of work per year compared to manual tracking, not to mention the increase in accuracy that Lee previously discussed. And then on the administrative side, managers have access to business insights and quick and easy approval processes. So this gives you as a manager full visibility on the program so that it stays surprise free and you can ensure you're checking all the boxes that you are looking to with your program.
Awesome. Thanks, Griff. And I want to note too that although these tools are super easy to use and simple for you to use on a day-to-day if needed, the work for us does not start once your program launches. Business reviews and consistent proactive management for us are really key pillars for management against things like inflation and making sure that everything is really optimized throughout your program. So again, We don't want your program to stay stagnant. We want to make sure that we're always consistently measuring it against the goal set out in the beginning. So this helps to reduce the likelihood of tax and, of course, increase your ROI. So reviews include things like, going over your program with your dedicated customer success manager, measuring against your KPIs, program goals, performing analysis as needed, reviewing reimbursement programs and vehicle profiles, seeing if it's a good idea to adjust your standard vehicle. And again, looking at your goals for the next year, looking at any changes to federal state law and making adjustments as necessary. Common KPIs actually that companies measure against to make sure that their program is trending successfully includes the following. So mileage minimums, as I mentioned before, there are really key thresholds that exist to help you determine what the ROI in your program is going to be. So the 5,000 mile mark is a really simple one, but there's some other ones depending on what your rate looks like that we can help monitor to see if people are trending towards seeing tax or not. Tax compliance status is also a really great thing to monitor. Whether you are taxing annually or quarterly, you can use quarterly tax reports to see where you're trending. Spend year to date and cost savings so far is another really great thing to measure consistently with your customer success manager. And then lastly, industry position versus other companies, right? Like where do you want to play? Where are you sitting? And then you can use these standards to adjust as necessary and work with your partner to make a really solid team and to essentially support a long-term, solid, agile approach to field enablement.
Perfect. So we're going to close out by examining a very interesting case study that we saw with one of our customers, hers. So our partnership with hers began as a transition from another vehicle reimbursement partner. So they were focusing on their employees already driving personal vehicles for work. Upon building out highly personalized reimbursement, they decided to also give their employees on their fleet program the option to choose if they wanted to switch to a personal vehicle reimbursement model. The result of this overall was that 60% of their total driver population preferred the fixed and variable rate personal vehicle model to their fleet vehicles. So this is the perfect example of giving drivers options and finding harmony between fleet and favor programs so the employees know that they were getting what was the best fit for them individually and their lifestyle.
Amazing. Now, to end us off with a couple additional words, we know that moving from traditional fleet to personal vehicles can feel scary, especially if you have been on fleet for many, many, many years. But it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be all at once, and it also doesn't need to be something to be scared of, right? Employees can receive fair market reimbursements that make them feel whole without sacrificing company peace of mind due to increasing inflationary pressures, liability concerns, and vehicle and access challenges, right? So we hope that you really learned a lot today about what a good reimbursement model looks like, reimbursement model options, mileage thresholds, program management, and how to ace the inclusion of personal vehicles with a great partner. We'll now take any questions that you have. Thank you so much. Alrighty, I'm seeing the chat. The Q&A box is coming in. All right. Okay, I will start. Okay. The first question, let's start with what are the best cost-saving methods when I switch from company-owned vehicles to a reimbursement model? I think we talked about this a little bit through the presentation. I think this came up a little bit earlier. So in terms of cost savings, you're going to probably see the highest ROI from a switch when you move on to favor, because it really there's a low likelihood of overpayment with favor, whereas if you go to a cents per mile program using the IRS standard rate, you could potentially see overpayment, especially if you have high mileage drivers. So favor is probably going to be your best bet there. And of course, if you want to meet and discuss, happy to do so. Okay. What are the main differences between Canada and the US? I love this question. Now, most of us know that the IRS and the CRA have a little bit of differences in terms of how they enable tax-free solutions. The programs that we showed you today, CPM, tax-free car allowance, and favor, are IRS programs. They come from the guidance of the IRS publications. So they are tax-free under the IRS in the United States. In Canada, it's slightly different. The CRA is a little bit more stringent with what they consider to be non-taxable. The CRA rates, as discussed previously, so those tiered rates are really going to be your best best bet if tax compliance and being tax-free is your number one concern. That is most likely going to be really where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. We do have customers who do favor in Canada because they want to give those fair market rates. We absolutely can do that. It really is going to depend on what your mileage looks like to see if there's going to be a strong ROI for you and your team. But that's the major difference between Canada. I will also note that pursuing a tiered approach for variable rates, so like having different variable rates in the US is not very common. It's often optically not looked at the best if you're giving a variable rate that's not the IRS standard rate. So that's why you typically would go to favor instead, because it's more widely applicable and it gives you that fixed reimbursement that tends to be a little bit more attractive. Alrighty. Okay. What happens when people fall out of favor compliance? What are the favor compliance regulations? I love this question. Webinars, will we mind going to slide 34? Perfect. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so I'm just going to give this visual because it helps with understanding favor compliance. Now, of course, favor does enable us to pay tax-free over the IRS standard rate, which is why it comes with certain favor requirements so that we can pay tax-free. So the most well-known requirement and the most basic requirement is that 5,000 mile rule, which we talked about earlier. There must also be at least 5 drivers on a favor program. That's an IRS regulation. Most companies don't have too many challenges with that. So 5,000 miles, 5 drivers. And I will note, and we kind of alluded to this briefly, but because favor reimburses for the business use of insurance requirements, driver's insurance must also be verified for appropriate coverage. Car Data does that. It's all included in our fully managed end-to-end reimbursement solution. So this is great because it helps to make sure that from a liability perspective, your people are supported on the road. So nobody's driving uninsured, everything is supported and solid. But it also helps to make sure that you're not reimbursing somebody for an insurance coverage amount that they don't have. In the eyes of the IRS, this would be considered income because, hey, you don't actually have those costs, right? So we want to check for insurance, not only because it helps us from a liability perspective, but also keeps people in favor compliance. Couple other things. Vehicle age is also considered. So when you build your program, you're going to want to build it within thresholds for age, which we help you do. So that means you want to make sure that you're not reimbursing for depreciation that actually doesn't exist. So if a car is fully depreciated and they're being paid out a certain amount for depreciation every year, the IRS is going to say, maybe that's not at cost. So that's something that we consider as well. Same thing goes for the cost value of the standard vehicle profile. So I mentioned you design it off a typical vehicle required to do the job. You want that vehicle required to do the job to be somewhat similar to the actual type of car that somebody's driving. Again, because they're going to say, hey, the costs of operating that vehicle are not necessarily parallel to the standard vehicle costs for the company under favor. But again, this is something that we're very familiar with. Most companies don't struggle too much, especially if they're coming off a fleet, because they've got high mileage drivers. And really, these favor requirements are simply guide rails for us to make sure that we're designing our programs fairly. And of course, we do update programs annually to make sure that they're up to date. Great question. Last follow-up actually on this. So if drivers do fall out of favor compliance, you might have remembered during the section on tax-free car allowance, I told you a little bit about how to calculate for tax against the IRS standard rate. So all that happens if somebody falls out of favor compliance is we just see if there's any applicable tax. We just do the quick math to see if there's any taxability. A lot of the times it's not. If there is, they would only be taxed on a small amount or the difference, not the full amount. So it's still a really, really, really good idea to have effective mileage capture, to track mileage well with a good partner, with an easy use app to erode your taxability, even if you are on favor and you fall out of compliance. Great question. Do we have another minute for another question? Does it make sense? Oh, does it make sense to switch my fleet to electric vehicles? I like this question a lot. I think this is really a huge topic that's coming out in fleet discussion groups lately. It's really, it's been popular in NAFA. So of course, a lot of companies are coming out with really stringent sustainability initiatives. They're going to want to be carbon neutral. There's all these elements to consider. And right now in the United States, infrastructure-wise, it's very challenging to imagine a world where everybody is on EVs because it's hard to to know that we're ready for that. And I know that a lot of fleet managers are feeling the heat. And so in this time, it's actually a perfect idea to consider who actually needs a company car, because wanting to avoid the complete purchasing of EVs that have a really high initial acquisition value, it's a good idea to consider how favor can be used as an incentive to enable electric vehicle use. So under favor, there's actually a couple ways to do this. You can either reimburse people using a typical combustion engine standard vehicle model that will give them a really, really, really nice benefit if they're using a electric vehicle, because the costs of operating an electric vehicle for a variable amount, hint, hint, fuel, are a lot lower than operating a typical combustion engine vehicle. So it's a really big incentive for people to be on EVs because they can pocket a lot more and it's fully tax compliant today. The other option is you can actually fully design favor rates that are based on electric vehicles. So you can pay fairly based on a standard vehicle for EVs. It's going to have a higher fixed amount and a lower variable amount because it's more expensive, but it is less expensive to drive. So there are a lot of incentives. We're happy to work with you and your team depending on what your EV goals are and when you have to hit them, because it's a really perfect time to get out of the company car only business when you're considering these big, lengthy, expensive sustainability initiatives. Awesome. Okay, perhaps one more. Okay, if my company is currently on fleet, how can I implement a hybrid fleet or favor program, or even fully transition out of fleet? Yeah, I mean, we talked about this really briefly. It's such a important question. It is going to depend on what your contract looks like. At the end of the day, a lot of fleet organizations are bound to very specific timelines and contracts. We know that. We're very used to this. So it's important, we say, to get in early and to start talking with providers as early as possible so that you can say, okay, this is the timeline of when I know I'm going to have to recondition my cars or give them back, right? Or sell them. And working with us to build a really strong policy moving forward, because not only will we have to design your rates, of course, but we want to build really great training and really great policy for your people to follow to get them excited, and then also assist with things like vehicle turnover, getting people onboarded, and making sure that your system is set up for success everywhere between program design, mileage capture, to direct payment, and compliance verification, the whole works. So the best way to do it is to talk with us early so that we can help align with your contract terms and build something that works for your independent organization. Awesome. I think that's all we have time for today, folks. If I didn't get to your question, I will follow up with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really hope you got something out of this, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Have a good one, guys.